As much as sours are an entire family, the whiskey sour is definitely the Kim Kardashian of the bunch. It's simple but effective, zingy and refreshing, and you should have an awesome one as part of your cocktail arsenal. The sour formula is one repeated in hundreds, if not thousands of cocktails, so master the basics and then experiment until your heart's content. You have that basic cocktail triangle of strong, sweet and sour, so if you get those balanced, then you can't go wrong. So, where does the whiskey sour come from? The sour tends to be thought of by cocktail historians as an individualized version of that matriarch of all cocktails, the punch. The punch definitely deserves its own episode, but basically it's a combination of base spirit, citrus, sugar and water, and so you can see how it's the predecessor to basically every cocktail which doesn't fall into the old-fashioned category, so sours, Collins, daisies, etc. As is the excuse with many cocktails, so the sour was originally born out of medical necessity. Navies often didn't have access to safe drinking water, and beer would spoil on long journeys, so sailors received a ration of spirits, usually rum. To try and combat scurvy, they would mix their spirits with lime juice, and a primitive sour was born. They then took this concoction to shore with them, where it was refined somewhat, and generally the spirit used there would be whatever was most widely available in the country. So for instance, in England, it would be more likely to be gin, and then in America, American whiskey was the go-to. In Jerry Thomas's 1862 Bartender's Guide, he includes recipes for brandy, gin and rum sours, and whiskey sours started to appear around the same time. In the 1870s, they're mentioned in newspaper articles in a manner which tends to indicate that they needed no introduction, so Americans were certainly drinking plenty of them by that point. Egg white started popping up around 30 years later, probably to mask the inferior bootleg booze during Prohibition. You can use any kind of whiskey for your whiskey sour, but I'm going to stick with the traditional bourbon. As I discuss in our rye versus bourbon smackdown, you can get the best of both worlds by opting for a high rye content bourbon, which is why I've gone for Bulleit. This way, you still get a good amount of spice with your smooth and rich base. So this little guy is a contentious issue. Original sour recipes did not call for egg white, and purists will argue that the addition of egg white actually makes it a Boston sour. Whatever the semantics, I do think that the texture added by the white is now the thing that people associate most with a sour cocktail. The egg white gained popularity to round out the jagged edges of inferior whiskey, but it also, by some sort of scientific magic, makes your drink silky, fuller bodied, and with that signature frothy head. If you prefer your sour tangier, or you want to taste the booze more, or if you're vegan, feel free to leave the egg white out. Bitters are also not necessary, but to be honest, I think that most cocktails benefit from the length and complexity that they provide. I use orange bitters as they are light and floral enough not to mess with the balance of your sour, and they also don't change the colour, so it stays nice and lemony fresh. To start, we'll prepare a twist. So I just take a nice big thick piece of the rind off, and then as always go back and trim off all of the white pith. So we're going to use our golden cocktail ratio, so 2 parts of the strong, the booze, 1 part of the sour and half a part of the sweet. In this case, I'm going to go for a full 60 mils of my high rye content bourbon, which also equates to 2 fluid ounces. Next, we have 1 part or 30 mils or 1 fluid ounce of freshly squeezed lemon juice. Then we have a half a part or 15 mils of sugar syrup. Obviously egg white's a little bit hard to measure out, but around 15 mils of your egg white. And 2 good dashes of your orange bitters. We're going to dry shake this first. I will go into this in more detail, but basically don't put any ice in your shaker. Just pop your tins together, make sure they're nice and tight, and give it a good shake. As you can see, this makes your drink nice and fluffy. Then we need to chill and dilute, so you'd better get some ice in your little part of the shaker. You don't really need to slam it, you just need to make sure that this bit's nice and straight, hold it together, and preferably not facing whoever's sitting in front of you, and shake as hard as you can. When your tin gets all nice and frosty, that's it cold enough. Pop it open, give it a little taste. Delicious. Whether or not to serve sours up, i.e. in a coupe, or down on the rocks on a rocks glass is entirely a matter of personal preference. Obviously, if you serve it on ice, it is going to continue to dilute and it will separate over time. So if you're a slow drinker, then maybe up is the right way for you. Personally, my cocktails never seem to last longer than a couple of minutes, and I like the feeling of a nice heavy rocks glass in my hand, so I go for that. So you want to double strain into a chilled glass with big ice. It is actually quite important to use the fine strainer in this one, otherwise those little chips of ice will ruin that lovely foam that you've worked so hard on. Give your twist a good squeeze over the top, and that'll also burst any little air bubbles that you have in your egg white foam. And if you feel a little bit fancy, find yourself a cocktail cherry and you can skewer that along with your twist for your garnish. The whiskey sour. So now you know. If you are using the egg white, this is where it gets controversial. Much like making a meringue, that light foam on top of your drink comes from breaking down the proteins in the egg white, and to do this it takes a fair amount of elbow grease, but you obviously don't want to end up shaking your cocktail for so long and so hard that you over dilute it. So some bright spark came up with what's called the dry shake. So you add all of your ingredients to the shaker and shake it without ice first to emulsify the egg and get that nice fluffy texture going. And then you add the ice and shake it again to chill and dilute. This is the most common technique that I've encountered while working in bars, but there is a third and probably more scientifically accurate school of thought, which is the reverse dry shake. The argument is that adding the ice once you've already emulsified the egg is just going to break down that nice foam that you've worked so hard to create. So they say that what you should do is shake everything except the whites on ice first, strain it out, then add the whites and dry shake. To be perfectly honest, I find that a bit of a around in the middle of a really hectic service, and I've never had much of an issue getting a nice foamy head just by shaking really hard. But obviously this is the place for you to experiment. There's literally no end to the possible permutations of a recipe so simple as base spirit, sweet and sour. I've already introduced you to a couple, the margarita and the penicillin. The closest cocktail to the sailor's original concoction is of course the daiquiri, being rum and lime juice. It's such a simple cocktail that it's a really good indication of a bartender's ability if they're able to balance it properly. And it's actually a bit of a handshake shot amongst bartenders to go into each other's work and have little snackeries. One of my favourite twists on the whiskey sour is called the New York sour, which is basically the exact same, but you layer a little red wine float on top. So not only does it look really pretty because the wine stays separate from the rest of the drink, but it also adds a really nice depth of flavour and dryness. A delicious sour uses apple brandy as the base spirit and a peach liqueur as a sweetener, and as you can imagine, it really does live up to its name. But you can see there how much fun you can have experimenting with this style of cocktail. If you just choose your base spirit and then have a think about what sweeteners you could use that are going to enhance the flavours that you like in the spirit. So the penicillin is another really good example because the honey and ginger syrup brings out those delicious notes in the Scottish whiskey.